All right, we are here today with the Console Wars author, Blake Harris. Blake, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And as I was just saying before, thank you so much for all the support over the past few weeks and months for the book. Because as much as I have a lot at stake personally here, and it's really important to me as a writer, one of my main intentions with the book was really just to shine a light on people like Tom Kalinske, Al Nilsson, Diane Fornacier, Shinobu Toyota, Ellen Beth Van Buskirk. I can go on and on. All these people who have inspired me personally and really shaped our childhoods, and yet I had never heard of before 3 years ago. So everything you're doing, keep doing it. Thank you so much for doing it. I just want to keep getting the story out there because it's an incredible story that I still to this day can't believe is true and can't believe that nobody has written about it before. So thank you to other people's apathy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, reading through the book, when I first heard about that you were going to be doing this story. It's crazy that no one has really gone back and done it. I mean, there's been little bits and pieces that focus on maybe like Sega's history and things like that, but nothing that really goes and tells that whole story. And it's amazing that it's amazing that someone finally did it, and lucky for you that you were able to do that. But the way you told it and everything, and we'll get more into that, but it was just very, very good. So
yeah, I mean, I've wanted to be a writer for 10 years now, and I've come up with several ideas over these years, some good, some bad, but this was the one that I would just say to people, well, it's about Sega and Nintendo, and then they would cut me off and they'd be like, that's a great idea. I was like, I haven't even really told you the idea. They're just like, their mind is spinning, and that's because there's so much there that resonates with a large population, whether you were a kid playing or whether you were a parent trying to get these Christmas gifts. Like, it's surprising to me that nobody wrote about it before, but now I have, and I hope it paves the way for other people to write long stories about individuals in the video game industry and at Sega.
Yeah, absolutely. One of our writers on staff, Andrew, he's a filmmaker, but he's also an excellent writer as well, and he's done a couple documentaries. He's actually lives in Australia, and your book has actually inspired him to take a step back and actually do something similar on the 3DO, like Trip Hawkins' 3DO
That's
company.
Great.
So he's actually, after he's been reading through this book, he's like, man, I want to do something just like Blake did, but with 3DO. And so like you just said, you are inspiring people out there right now with this book.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. But before we really get started into the book and everything, I want to kind of take a step back and rewind and go to your early childhood and talk a little bit about what that was like, where you grew up, and really, I mean, if video games actually played a part in your life back then. So can you kind of talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I grew up in Chappaqua, New York, which people know because that's where Bill Clinton moved to after he was president. But my childhood was like any other until Christmas of 1988, or maybe it was 1989. I got an 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System, and that was the greatest thing up to that point that I'd ever received. And I even distinctly remember thinking at the time, like, I didn't even really understand what it did. Like, I didn't know what I was going to be going home and doing, but I knew that this was like the it toy. This was like some promise of amazing hours and things that were coming, and just feeling so excited. And probably a lot of the times I talk about my childhood, I'll be saying we, which is me and my brother. I have a brother who's 2 years younger named Dylan. And I was definitely not a particularly nice brother. You'll notice in the acknowledgement for the book, I actually apologized to him for the way I acted during our childhood, which in parentheses I said was like a dick. So I was really insecure growing up. I was an older brother. I wasn't very nice, but the one thing that we always had in common and that one thing that connected us was video games. And I think that that's another reason that this era and playing these games resonates with so many of us, because it's not, because I find a lot of people say we, because it's either playing with dad or playing with the brothers or trying to defeat your sister or older brother. And so we had a Nintendo, and we played for a lot. Back then I don't think that I would have ever said I was a gamer, but that's because I don't think anybody was a gamer. I think that that was just a part of the social life. I've described it as the social lubricant, playing video games, because I would never just call up a friend and say, hey, you want to come over and talk about girls or talk about sports? But I would say, you want to come over and play video games? And we would talk about girls and we'd talk about sports. And that was really just sort of that thing that brought us together. And it was so fun that naturally in late 1991, probably approaching Hanukkah in our household, I wanted to get a Super Nintendo. and I remember my father telling me that he would definitely not get this for us because Nintendo would then just come out with a Super Duper Nintendo, then Super Duper Nintendo, and his words were prophetic. I guess he knew something about business that I didn't realize at the time, but also within that, it kind of speaks to some extent, like the business side of this. The reason that he felt that way was because a lot of people were upset, particularly parents, that the Super Nintendo didn't play the old games. It didn't have backward compatibility, and at its core, that's a business decision. It would have cost an additional about $75, and that's the kind of stuff that, as I look back into this topic, it sort of put my childhood through a different prism, because I never would have thought at the time. I just thought, oh, Dad just hates Super Nintendo, or maybe like it's too expensive. But I never thought, because of a decision that was made in a boardroom thousands of miles away, I didn't end up with this system. And as a loophole to that logic, or just because my dad didn't want to give money to Nintendo, we got a Sega Genesis, that was a great system. Sonic was outstanding. I do remember when those Welcome to the Next Level campaign commercials came out that were so cool and that I loved so much that for the first time in my life I was kind of conscious of the fact of brand awareness. I wasn't precocious enough to actually be able to articulate it like that, but I knew that Sega was something that I wanted to be, that I wanted to be like, that I was like proud to be a Sega guy, and then I also felt like a layer below that like I wasn't as cool as a Sega person, and I aspired to be this brand, which is exactly what Tom and Al and Diane wanted. That was what they set out to do. So mission accomplished. And so video games were a large part of my childhood. I mostly played sports games. NBA Jam, NHL '94 were my favorites. Toe Jam and Earl was a big one in the Harris household. And after school, it was always the first thing I did when I came home. So it was every day part of my life. And then after the Genesis, I had a bar mitzvah in December '95, and my parents said I could buy one thing with the money that I'd received, and the rest would go towards my college education. And I was like, I'll definitely get a Sega Saturn. And we went to Toys R Us, and we told the guy I wanted a Sega Saturn, and the guy was like, I really think you should go with the Sony PlayStation. And I was like, no, but I love the Genesis, I love Sega, and I really like the Virtua Fighter game and the Virtua Cop game especially. And he's like, listen, man, you can do whatever you want, but I really advise, and I was insecure back then, so I was easily talked into things. I would have ended up with a 3DO if he had said that. But so I ended up with a PlayStation, and that was around the time I was getting into middle school. And then I didn't really play video games that much. I played the NFL Game Day on the PlayStation, but I kind of just lost touch with video games. I never, if someone said, do you like video games, I would have said absolutely, but it just wasn't a part of my life. In high school, we got an N64, and Mario Kart was definitely a big part of my social life, and my high school not being very social life. And then I went off to college, didn't play video games, graduated from college. When I knew I wanted to be a writer, I had kind of figured that out my senior year of high school. I had, up to that point, I hadn't read a book for fun in like 8 years, and then I tried to impress a girl who gave me a book, and I read it overnight, and I was just like, oh my God, words, like, this is really interesting how these can bring together. And so from trying to impress her, I got really into reading and sort of making up for all the books I had missed during my years, like first with like Catcher in the Rye and Great Gatsby, and then on to things that actually I would discover on my own. And so writing and reading became a big part of my life. And I knew I wanted to be a writer. All throughout college, I went to Spain for a semester to go study abroad, but all I really did there was write a novel that now is probably pretty crappy, but at the time I thought was good and proved to me that I could do it. And so I ended up graduating college with what I thought was pretty good writing skills and storytelling skills, but I had no idea how to monetize that.
Right, yeah.
As I'm sure you can relate to. And the other, the problem with making a career out of writing, and I don't think there's any other way around it, is that there's just no track, and nor would it make sense for there to be a track. There's no, I remember when I was graduating, there was doctors and lawyers, and they were all like, now I apply to this thing, and then I apply to this thing. You either get in or you don't get in, and then you go down a different route. And I didn't really know what to do. Writer. So the one thing I knew I did want to do was, or I knew that I was proactive enough that I was always going to write. So even when I was 50, if I had never published anything, I was going to write because I like writing. And so I had that thing where at least I was always going to be self-motivated, and I didn't feel like I needed to go to get a film school degree or an MFA. I would have liked to, but it was expensive, and I didn't want to be graduating from one of those schools with debt. I thought that writing is so hard to monetize that I don't want to turn that into a debt that I'm now trying to pay off. So what I ended up doing was I worked in trading commodities. I got a job at a company called FEMAT, which is now called New Edge, and for 7 years I traded sugar, coffee, soybeans, and other assorted grains for Brazilian clients. And it sounds kind of interesting, and it actually was the first few years out of school. It was a lot like that movie Trading Places with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy, and there was some intellectually stimulating elements, but then everything went electronic, and then I just became a person who pushed a button and talked on the IM to customers. And all throughout that time, I continued to write. I wrote a movie called The Flying Scissors, which is about competitive rock, paper, scissors. It was a feature-length mockumentary. I had actually saved up a lot of money to go to film school based on my job. I was living with my grandma, so I was not paying rent, and then I ended up spending all this film school money to produce the film, which was, in hindsight, still a question mark. I mean, I did it, and my life's good, so I guess it was a good thing. But we made a movie that I think is good. It's not The Godfather, but it's a good, fun comedy. But like a lot of things with trying to succeed in creative endeavors, I didn't really know what to do next. I assumed that it would be done, and then things would come to me. Or I applied to Sundance, and I assumed that I would win Sundance, and then I would get an agent, and then people would just be like, "Here's money. Oh, here's more money." I mean, obviously, I didn't really think that, but I also just conceptually thought it would just happen, and it didn't. And that was where I learned probably the greatest lesson of my life is that, at least from my perspective, you really have to make things happen for yourself. And so, after I'd spent all my film school money on making this movie, that was a pretty good movie, but not a great movie. We'd been rejected from every festival we applied to. That was sobering. But I thought, what is this movie? It's a movie about competitive rock, paper, scissors. It's certainly not going to be winning any Academy Awards, but it's fun, and it's probably pretty cool for a college audience. So I contacted the school I went to, Georgetown, and asked them if their programming board would be willing to screen it one weekend, because they usually screen movies that were just out of theaters before they came out to DVD. And they said, yeah, sure, that sounds really cool. The trailer looks good. And then I thought, all right, well, I did go there, but maybe I should just contact other places. And so I ended up contacting 500 places. It took me a few weeks to figure out who was the student activity chair and all this stuff. But it was a numbers game, and 10% of the schools basically said yes. And we built a college tour, and then Warner Brothers Digital ended up buying the movie to distribute. And I mention all this at length because that is so much like my experience for researching console wars. I got used to hearing no a lot. I got used to turning maybes into yeses, and I just got used to hunting down and finding the information. It wasn't like I just clicked on Duke and then it was like, here's the person to contact if you want to talk about screening a movie.
Right.
I tried to figure out who to speak with and what I needed to say to that person based on information that would appeal to them. And that was how I got in touch with people like Tom and Al at first, because I didn't have any published writing credits, and the screenwriting that I'd done had never been produced on a larger scale, so they were really taking a chance on me to even give me the time of day. And that was a skill that I really learned from that movie. And so that pretty much takes me into 7 years working at my job and getting this idea to write this book.
That's awesome.
Yeah. How did you end up starting the podcast, by the way?
The podcast, wow. So that goes back probably to a site before we actually started doing SEGA Nerds. It was I had just graduated high school. I went into the Air Force, and at the time I didn't even know what I was really going to be doing in the Air Force. My recruiter, I wanted to do something in the medical field, and my recruiter called me up one day, and I wasn't supposed to leave for months after that. And my recruiter called me up, and he's like, "Hey, we got this job that just came open. It's called Public Affairs, and you'll be doing writing, news writing and things like that. And it's a really good job. You should take it." And I was like, all right, that sounds good to me. I always loved reading, and I liked doing a little writing, but it wasn't a passion for me or anything like that at that time. So he said, okay, I'll call you back here in a minute. And he calls me back. He's like, "Hey, you need to get ready because you have to ship out tomorrow to go to basic training." And I was like, "Holy shit!" I had no, I was not mentally prepared, and that kind of was the way it was all through basic training. It was just me kind of really out of my element, not being prepared for what was going on and everything. But it was after I had went through my my technical training and learning how to be a journalist and everything like that, that it was I moved to Montana, and I really got back into video games because it was about a 6 or 7 month span within that I wasn't able to do it a lot. But I had my Dreamcast with me. I actually took my Dreamcast with me to basic training. My drill instructors freaked out that I brought a video game system with me to basic training. They're like, "You think you're going to be able to play video games in basic training?" I was like, I don't know. So I ended up, they put it all away. Of course, I wasn't able to have it with me. And I got it back when I went to tech training. And it was great because we all, when we were done with going to school that day, we'd all come back and we'd sit in our dorm rooms and we would play Soul Calibur on the Dreamcast, or we'd play, I think it was like NFL Quarterback Club 2008 or something like that, and or it would be 2000 or 99, I think it was, or 1998, and so we had this great thing, and so it was basically I moved out to Montana and I didn't have any friends there. And I had finally got my first computer on my own, and I went and I just found I would Google I wouldn't Google, I don't know what it was back then, Ask Jeeves or something.
Yeah.
So I would go in these search engines and search Sega, and I finally came up to the Sega.com site, and they actually had a forum there, and that was probably the first forum that I'd ever really got involved in. And I just started talking to some of the people there and kind of making these friends because, like I said, I didn't have any friends in Montana. I was kind of by myself there with my family. And I found a few friends, and I was like, "Hey, you know what? I'm a writer. I would like to, take this and start writing about Sega." And I'd always thought that being able to be a video game journalist was like one of the best jobs in the world. Like growing up, I'd read the magazines and everything like that. And so I found a couple guys, and we decided to start a Dreamcast website called Dreamcaster's Realm, and it's based on tripod.com, so it was like one of those free GeoCity style sites, and it's actually, you can still see it today. It looks terrible.
Definitely go check it out. That's great.
Oh yeah, it's really bad, and it's all still up there. We have some, and it's funny to just kind of go back and take a look at it every once in a while. But we did that for a little while, and then it was when Sega declared that they were going to discontinue the Dreamcast that things really changed for us. That we decided, okay, what are we going to do now? I mean, the Dreamcast is going to go away. There's not going to be any games for it. So we decided, all right, let's create a new website on Sega, and that way we can cover everything. It doesn't have to be just Dreamcast. We can cover Genesis, but we can also cover the new stuff that they're doing as well. And we just came up with the name SEGA Nerds, and that's when we kind of started doing that. And then we moved platforms. We finally found like a content management system. We didn't even know what that was at first. We were doing everything in Microsoft Front Page before that because we didn't know what we were doing.
And who is the we? Who are the guys that you're doing this with?
The guy that really started with me is Graham Cookson. He lives in England. He's our European editor, and he's been with me ever since the very beginning. So we've known each other. It's crazy, but we've known each other for about 13 years now that we've been actually working on websites together. And he actually finally, I met him a couple years ago. He flew down or flew over here from England, and we went to a video game convention together, and he stayed with us for about a week or so. And it was great to kind of hang out with him. But really, I mean, I have a passion for writing. I love writing, and video games just kind of translates into that. So that's one of the reasons why we kind of do what we do. And we just love keeping the name of Sega alive in people's minds, because really, you look at what Sega was back when, Tom Kalinske was really running things, and what Sega's kind of become today, it's very, very different. And it's not nearly, the company that many of us as we were kids kind of fell in love with. I mean, it's just kind of, it's sad to say, but it's just kind of another company producing, a few games a year, and there's a Sonic every once in a while, and people haven't really been very happy with those games either. But and that's really kind of why we do it. We love focusing on like the old school stuff, the retro stuff that we played as kids and everything. And I have to say, like, reading through the book and reading some of these stories, like the Sonic Tuesday, and being able to remember back when that happened, and like you said, Welcome to the Next Level, those commercials, it brought back so many great memories of that as a kid. and it was just really awesome. But I think releasing this book right now was a perfect time, because it seems like there's a resurgence of like that retro style. Like the 80s is really cool right now. You know, retro gaming is very, very cool right now. So I think you picked a perfect time to bring this book out, because so many people are interested in going back and playing these old games and stuff. You know.
Yeah, thank you. I'll tell you about how I ended up coming up with the idea and working on it.
Yeah.
And also just in terms of the timing, it's worked out really well, because I think that, for one thing, enough time has passed that people like Tom are willing to speak more openly and don't have any agreements in place or business that might be conflicted. And same thing for Nintendo. So that's been really helpful to me. And there is a greater appreciation for pop cultural products and events from the 80s and 90s now that those of us who were kids have disposable income and have a large voice and presence on the internet. And so, playing video games for me growing up was, like I said, a gigantic part of my life, but it had shrunk with each year, never by design, but that's just how it seemed to evolve. And a few years ago, my brother always gave me the worst gifts ever. Like, one year he literally gave me underwear, and I was like, you're my brother, like, why are you giving me underwear?
That's a grandmother gift.
Yeah, I was like, come on, like, how did you even think, like, he's like, well, Mom gives you socks, and I was like, yeah, but that's what she does. So in December of 2010, it was my birthday's in December, and he said, what do you want for your birthday? And I said, definitely not underwear, and I was like, nothing, I'm fine. I said, no, I always give you such bad things, but now I have a job and I want to get you something like really nice. And I was like, no, I don't spend money on me. And he's like, well, what's the best gift you ever got? And I said, it's probably our Sega Genesis. And then he said, okay, I'm going to get you a Sega Genesis. And I said, that's kind of a cool idea. I hadn't played one in about 15 years. And so he sent me a Genesis, and I ordered some games online. NHL 94 was one of my favorites. Mortal Kombat was another one that I ordered early on, and so when I booted this thing up, I expected that it would be really fun and nostalgic and bring back memories. But what I found when I played it was that not only was it that, but that like it was really challenging the game, and it was still really fun in a way that like this is where I had topped out in terms of video games. Like this was the last time I left off, and it was almost like I picked it up right where I left off, and that got me thinking, how is this such a big part of my life back then and such a small part of my life now? What were the factors that made that happen? And around that time, I saw the Social Network movie with my fiance, or with my now fiance, and I was asking her when we were in line what she thought was sort of that intersection of entertainment, culture, technology, and communication for our generation, if any. We were throwing out ideas, and I said, what about like Nintendo and Sega games? And she said, oh yeah, like I remember I really wanted Mario, and for some reason it was startling to me that this girl in St. Louis played Mario, and of course, the Nintendo, the NES was in one out of 3 homes in America, so it shouldn't have been startling to me, but just the idea that like we had never talked about it in our 5 years of dating, but that it had also been a big part of her life, just really got me thinking, all right, there's probably a lot of us out there. And again, it was kind of like a no-duh thought, but it really started to crystallize. And after I got past the great memories of late nights with my brother and fights with my brother and how this video game system really was the thing that kept our friendship alive during those years that I was such a jerk to him, I then came the curiosities of, what was going on behind the scenes. I was just a kid. Things like with the Super Nintendo, with the backward compatibility, what were the other things that were influencing my habits and my ups and downs as a child? And so before I even wrote Console Wars, I really just wanted to read Console Wars. So I went to this gigantic Barnes & Noble in Manhattan. It's 2 stories. I was looking at the film history section and then the music history section, trying to find the video game history section. No such section existed. I went to the information desk, which shows how much I actually want to learn about this, because I'm always like, oh, I can just look it up online. But I actually wanted to know, so I said, is there a video game history section? She snickered at me and was like, no. And I said, well, could I just get one of the books on Sega or Nintendo? And she looked it up, and there wasn't even anything that she could order, which I thought was, they always want to like get you to order. And I'm like, yes, I could use Amazon too. But so So I was surprised by that, and the only, so I said, how about just like anything on video games, history, business, anything in the store, and the only thing they had was walkthrough guides to games that I wasn't playing, and that was shocking to me for an industry that is as big as it is, bigger than film and bigger than music. It's fine if there's no video game history section, a mainstream book available for somebody who just wanted to learn about video games or the business behind it. I was shocked. And that was when I started to really think that maybe there's a story here. And sort of as we described before we went live, you know, I thought this was like too good to be true. Like, how could nobody have written about video games? And I did find there are some really good works out there. David Sheff wrote a great book about Nintendo, Game Over. Harold Goldberg wrote a great book. Stephen Kent wrote a really great history. But aside from David's book, a lot of them were much more encyclopedic in nature.
Right.
And David's book was really the one that was most like the books I like to read, like The Smartest Guys in the Room, Disney War, stuff by Michael Lewis and Ben Mesrick. And so David's book was kind of exactly that. It was the story about the history of Nintendo and then its rise in the United States throughout the 80s and how they resurrected the industry. And so I was like on the edge of my seat reading it. But it's when I felt like it started to get really interesting with Sega on the scene and this challenger, finally there was like a conflict in the story. It ended, and you know, basically it ended in 1992. He wrote it and said, you know, there's this thing called the World Wide Web on the horizon, and people keep talking about the buzzword of multimedia. So like, who knows what the future brings? And I thought, like, I really want to know about this time period. And the only article even that I could find that touched on Sega during those years, beyond the games, you know, more into the boardroom, was an article that Travis Foss had written for IGN about the history of Sega. And it was like an 8-page history that started with David Rosen and went up to the Dreamcast. And so, you know, there was like half a page on Tom or maybe a page on that era, this golden era. And sort of I started to connect the dots. Okay, so this company that was like mildly successful and then had failed miserably in the console world does extremely well, takes down this Goliath that we can even, you know, we could talk for hours about how big Nintendo really was, and then they shrink back down, and that was like a page out of this article. Like, I want to know so much more about this, and so I saw in his article there was a quote from Tom, and I got in touch with him and asked, is that like a quote that he gave you, or was that a quote that you just picked up somewhere, maybe from Steven's book? And he said, no, Tom, let me interview him, and I asked if I could get Tom's information, and so I interviewed Tom, and was straightforward. Said, I have no writing credits. I've always wanted to write a book. I was thinking about maybe this would be a great screenplay in the vein of Social Network. I know that you are a busy man, and I didn't know how busy, nor did I know how much he accomplished in his life. Because when I Googled Tom Klinsky, because we had gotten past the years of Lycos and Dogpile on the site, and I can now Google him, it said like Wikipedia, and it said like 2 sentences, and I mean, I guess it was impressive, but I wasn't intimidated, as I should have probably been. I knew everything he did, and so I emailed him, and then I followed up, and he was very nice, but maybe wasn't super eager to set a time. But eventually, he is one of the kindest people I've ever met. So he really was great to me throughout the process. As a guy who's accomplished as much as he could have been very intimidating or brushed me off or said, I'm waiting for someone more successful than you to want to speak with me, but he made the time. And then when I finally set up this interview, it occurred to me the day before when I was at my commodity job, shit, how am I going to record what he says? So I was, for some reason I assumed it would be like a very easy way, and then I thought, I saw my phone doesn't have like a record feature, and so I went online and I searched up how to record a call, and all the places to buy equipment were like spy shops, and I was like, well, I didn't know. I just want to, I want to be a journalist, not in the espionage industry. So I made the decision, which ended up playing a big role, I think, in the interviews. Was I typed really fast, so I would type up the transcript of what he's saying as he said it. And in the end, that really made me become so much more engaged with these interviews than I would have been, because I did end up doing a few on Skype and recording them, and I found that those ones I never retained any of the information because I knew I had the safety net. And so I spoke with Tom, and I was keeping track of everything as we went along, and I was really at this point just trying to figure out if there's a story here. I knew that there was a really interesting list of facts on Wikipedia. But I wanted, if I was going to spend my time doing this, I wanted to see if there was a personal story that wasn't even just Tom's, but whether it was a story about people. Because as a kid, I just assumed all the games just sort of came out of the sky from Japan. And then I think that, like kind of how Sega was before Tom joined, or at least before they, when Tonka was distributing it, before Michael Katz, I just assumed that America was like, here, we'll take the game, and then here we just give it to you. And like, they weren't doing anything impressive or instrumental. But after speaking with Tom, we spoke for 2 hours, and I was simply blown away, and I was addicted right away to telling the story. Before we even got to his time at Sega, I realized that this man more from my childhood than any other adult besides my parents. From the Flintstones, Chewable Vitamins, to Barbie, which I did have for a short period of time.
We all played with one at least.
Yeah. He-Man especially was like a really big one for me growing up. And then, and like, you've spoken to him. He's an extremely humble guy. And so he says all these things matter-of-factly and not with any arrogance, but it's like, and then we created Masters Universe. And I'm like, what? Like, okay. And then or he'd be like, oh, and then we had like Joe Montana come in, or I was having dinner with Joe. And it's just, he is, for a guy who's achieved as much as he has and interacted with celebrities as much as he has, I've never met someone who is more down-to-earth and more humble. And that made writing this book as, the reason you were able to read a book that turned out the way it did was because of dealing with Tom and people like him, who actually helped me along and let me tell their story and gave me the discretion to do so, but they gave me all the raw material so that I could cook this together. And so after speaking with Tom, I thought, like that was the moment I was like, all right, this is definitely what I want to do. And a lot of that started just with this notion that his journey at Sega began with him on a beach. And that was so cinematic to me, and that's why I wanted the first chapter of the book to be this man on a beach. And as somebody who's a bit of an outsider to the video game world and video game culture at the time, and I've since grown to get back into games and get a PS3, and I have a Wii U now. But as an outsider, my goal was to tell a story that was appealing to other people like me. I assume that there were several people from my generation who had a lot of strong feelings, mostly positive for Sega and Nintendo, but stopped playing video games or just didn't think about video games much, or never really thought about why Sega and Nintendo were such a big part of our childhood. So I want to write a book that in my head was as dense and rich as Disney War, which tells the corporate story of Disney, and that read as quickly and as breezily as the Da Vinci Code. And my ideal reader throughout writing the whole book, and who I would think of anytime I was challenged with how to frame a chapter or whether I should include a story, was my grandmother, because she knows nothing about video games. She maybe knows the name Sega and Nintendo from when I used to ask for gifts. But if I can make the story appealing to her because it was about a man on a beach who was given an opportunity, who didn't know if he'd be given an opportunity like that, then I was doing well. And the best compliments I've received, other than those at Sega who just smile and nod and say, yes, this is exactly what it was like, this capturing this feeling, was, yesterday I got an email from a friend's mom who said, I've never played a video game in my life, and I was kind of reluctant to read this because as a mother, she never let her kids play video games, and she was kind of the uncool mom. And so I was kind of worried. I bought it because you're a friend of my son, but I didn't necessarily think I'd like it. But she said I could totally relate to being on vacation in Hawaii and having a husband who's restless and who doesn't know if he's going to have an opportunity again, and trying to support him, but at the same time being concerned about our welfare, and who has a million ideas at once, and how can you put that in the best way possible while at the same time having a family. And she was said, and then just the writing helped me really get into the story, and I wanted, had to go to sleep, but I stayed up and read the next chapter, and that was really the goal, because the video game world is so fascinating and so incredible. But for whatever reason, and we were talking about this earlier, I wouldn't say nobody, but very few people have really tried to write about it. And I think that what I really bring to the table is more of a literary type of writing, in addition to investigative journalism. And I'm surprised by how few people have attempted to explore this world before. And I don't really know why. I mean, I have some theories, but I just there's none that make me think, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I don't know why nobody's written this story before.
I was actually thinking something, really similar to that the other day. I was like, man, why has no one done this, yet? I mean, and there's, like you said, that, you look at other, industries, and all those are, are very well covered. Their histories and things. There's just so many rich stories and stuff that are told there.
Like, I really imagine that when I went, I wasn't joking when I said, can I get one of the books on Sega and Nintendo? I figured, like Steve Jobs, there's this definitive biography that's out now, but there's so many books about the start of Apple and the influence of Apple. I assume that there's just a lot of books on the subject. But
Yeah.
I cut you off.
No. And the only thing I could really come back and think is like, that there weren't a lot of like, really central figures that really kind of, or many of them, I should say, like there is in, other industries where there's like music or, like sports or things like that. And also I know that, the PR companies within video games are very controlling of their, story and what they do. They're very tight with that, and, they're very careful at what, narrative plays out. So that's the only thing I could come back and really think to is that maybe there's just hasn't been, a lot of those, strong central characters, and also just that the stories are being kind of kept hidden in a way. And not told. So until you've really come in and done that and been able to interview so many people, no one else has really done it since then, or before that. So
yeah, I mean, and even David Sheff's book, which is sort of the model. I sort of viewed my book as a sequel to that. He definitely had cooperation and participation with Nintendo while he was doing it, which I certainly didn't have. And just speaking to the level of access and PR help, that I think is a large part of why he was able to tell as great a story as he did. My other theories were, very much I agree that, for better or worse, we live in a celebrity-driven culture often, and because, there's not names on the jerseys that say, like, Tom Kalinske and all these things, people never really thought twice about him. I think that also, for better or worse, a lot of people really imagined that it was all Japanese-driven, and that it is all Japanese-driven, and I don't even think out of bias, but people just sort of think like, all right, that's not my story. That's not something I'm interested in. And also, there's the fact that like developers aren't always credited. Like they go out of their way not to credit people. So that makes it even harder. And then there is the just the other fact that the PR aspect makes it really difficult. But for whatever reason, I completely lucked out that nobody had written about this before in this way. And so after I spoke with Tom, it was a great call, but he is, a busy man. Like I would have loved to talk to him every day for the next 2 months, but that was unrealistic. So my next resource, other than after reading those books and getting everything I could online, I really want to tell a personal story and see this from as many angles and vantage points as possible. And so my best resource was one that I had made so much fun of up until that point, which was LinkedIn. I thought this was like Facebook for work. How stupid. But I typed in Sega and Nintendo, and it would come up with a couple thousand people. I could see what years they were at these companies. And again, like with the flying scissors experience, reaching out to colleges, I reached out to hundreds of people. About 10, 20% replied. Most 75% would speak with me. And I still then didn't even know who were the players, and I had some sense, but like I would speak to anybody. If you were at Sega, if you were a janitor at Sega, fine. If you were like senior vice president, fine. I didn't have enough of the dots in my head to even know how to connect them. And so I ended up speaking with like 50 people that way, and once they seemed to have a good enough experience speaking with me, they would also then say, oh, you should talk to this person, or they would mention someone who maybe wasn't on LinkedIn, and I would find out where they were today. And anytime somebody mentioned another person's name, I always tried to find that person. So there were, there's definitely a lot of people who were pivotal to Sega's success that are not in the book. But I did try to track down as many as possible, and also try to tell their part of the story, as long as it still was able to be that fast-moving narrative that, anecdotes didn't detract from this larger story. But it was a great experience, and like the real turning point for me, well, there was a few big turning points. I put together a book proposal, with the hopes that I would end up selling this. I did have a really great literary manager in Hollywood named Julian Rosenberg, who helped me find a book agent in New York, Alex Glass. And when I spoke with him, he said, I think this is a great topic. It's going to be really hard for you because you're a first-time writer. But like, I believe in the topic, and from what little I've seen of your writing, I feel like pretty, you're in a good position to do this. So let's see if we can try to sell this. And so I put together a book proposal, and I sent it to Tom and to Al and to some of the other people who had been helping me. And that was really the moment where things clicked. I think for them, one, they felt like they could trust me in the sense that, like, their story was in good hands, that I knew how to tell it and bring it to life. and two, that maybe this experience had been important to them personally, and that they knew that people cared about this in the same way that I knew that my girlfriend played Mario, but I didn't really think about it. And I think that they started to see why this was a really important story, and it was important for a lot of reasons, more so than just that they won market share, which was really hard. But like, there was a lot of human drama, a lot of personal growth, a lot of incredible anecdotes that inspired me as a writer, and that will inspire owners of businesses out there. And so, in addition to really getting them on board and really opening up even more and helping put me in touch with other people, writing this book proposal was also really helpful because, with this goal of reaching a mainstream audience, I thought I kind of learned my lesson from SEGA that, before you have an identity, you sort of buy an identity, and they had Michael Jackson and Buster Douglas and Joe Montana, and so I was trying to think, like, who can be somebody that would help me bring this story and connect it to a greater audience? And pie in the sky, I thought Seth Rogen would be the perfect guy, because he's obviously, he's a movie star, but he's also a really smart movie star because he's involved in production, and I knew he was directing episodes of Undeclared when he was like 18 years old. And
isn't that nuts? That's crazy.
I'm shocked, Seth is my age. Like,
yeah, it's weird
when I was doing The Flying Scissors, one of the actors who became my friend said, I know who your nemesis is going to be for trying to succeed in writing, and he said, it's this guy Seth Rogen, and I was like, who's that? And this was before he was really famous, but he'd been in the 40-Year-Old Virgin. He said, oh, he's the guy in 40-Year-Old Virgin. I was like, that guy I think is like 45 years old, but he's actually 31, or maybe he's turned 32, but he's our age. He's our age, and he grew up with Nintendo and Sega in his life, and so at least there was a chance that this subject matter would resonate with him the way it had with me. And so my manager sent over this early draft, and it's made its way up the ladder at his company, Point Grey Pictures. And then in January of 2012, I got to meet with him and Evan Goldberg and talk about our experiences and why I thought this was a great story in the vein of Social Network, and why I thought it was timely. And they couldn't have agreed more and it couldn't have been more supportive. And they got back in touch with my manager later that night to say they're in. They wanted to produce a documentary based on the subject matter that I would direct with my business partner, Jonah Tulis, and they also wanted to be involved in a feature film adaptation of the book, and that they would, Seth's schedule is obviously incredibly busy and a lot of writing, but they would be as supportive as they could in whatever capacity, and they have been. And so we actually, that was before I had sold this book, so we brought Seth Rogen on board before I'd even sold the book. Which was like surreal, and the most. I can
imagine that there's like mounting pressure on you at going on. Now there's like all these people involved, and you're like, holy shit, I got this book that there's a lot of pressure to come through. This book for me was like the greatest personal experience aside from whatever success I hope it gains. I grew so much. Prior to my first interview with Tom, I was a really shy person. And, I even probably would have tried to get out of this, or I would have done the audio version of this. And I was thinking, like, I wanted to do all my interviews by email, because that's kind of a cowardly way to do it. And I knew that I could come up with good questions, but I didn't want to have to talk to the people, and what if I said something dumb, or what if I got nervous? But after speaking with Tom, I realized how ludicrous that was, because Tom is a great storyteller, and you get so much, 75% of the value is the way he tells a story, or where he pauses, or what he doesn't Absolutely.
say. And I thought, I really just need to grow up and learn to talk to these people. And I did, and that was, that helped me speak to Seth, and that helped me then pitch the book. And then later on, Seth met with Scott and Scott produces some of the best movies in Hollywood, and also including Social Network and Moneyball, which were two of the three books that most influenced me, or the books they were based on. So having him on board was a real trip. And so I met with Scott on like a Wednesday in July or August of 2012, and extremely, extremely impressive guy. I see why he's so successful. He just gets things right away and asks the right questions and knows how to go about crafting the story. I think a lot of people, when they hear Sega Nintendo, they like the idea, but they think of their own personal experiences. I could see Scott was already thinking, like, all right, who would be a protagonist, or how would this work? And he's just really impressive. And so that was like on a Wednesday, and he said, before you sell this book proposal or try to, do you mind, like, can I bring it to the studio Sony and see if, we could try to sell it to them beforehand? And I was like, Scott, I'll do whatever you say. Like, if you were like, give this to me for free right now, I was like, sure. And so, I expected like everything in the film world. It would take a really long time. I met with Seth in January, and we were now meeting with Scott in August because things just take a long time. And I'm an impatient person, but I would have waited a decade to have any of these guys in it because they were the right guys. And so that was on a Wednesday, and then Friday I got an email from somebody who sent me this website that tracks domain purchases. So it looked at and tries to like infer why those things were being purchased. So it noticed that Sony had bought 24 domains that were like consolewarsmovie.com, consolewarsnet, and like all these things. And I guess that was like how I found out, all right, this is like maybe going to actually happen. And so Sony was interested in buying the film option to this book proposal that I still hadn't sold yet, with Scott Rudin attached to produce and Seth and Evan attached to produce and to write and direct. And so it was really a dream come true, and all of it was like I had the greatest life ever, except that I was still working at my job trading commodities. And like, you have to make a living, so that was fine. But it was really surreal for me to like, I would step out and I would go on the phone and be with like Seth Rogen and Scott Rudin, and then be like, all right, I got to go. And then I'd be like, all right, trade 7 lots of sugar and and so my agent, we had a great package in place. And in November of 2012, we sent the book proposal out to 23 publishers. And believe it or not, even with these big names, 20 of the 23 passed. Wow. And the reason was, we always heard some version of like, the writing is really strong and it seems interesting, but video game books just don't sell. And my entire premise for writing it was like,
right, based on what?
So I was like, yeah, because you guys haven't sold them yet. But I, who am I to say that? Maybe they have wisdom beyond me. And then the most recent video game book had been Tom Bissell's Extra Lives, which is a really enjoyable book, but it's his personal essays and sort of experiences interacting with some of the developers and how video games helped him when he was living in Eastern Europe. But certainly not at all like what I was trying to write. And so I couldn't believe that even with these people in place, that many people passed, but there was 3 companies that were interested, and they bid for the rights to the book, and HarperCollins won the bidding. And that day was probably the best day of my life, at least up until that point. There was an auction, and I would find out by noon if somebody bought the book, because even we knew 3 companies were interested, but none of them, we didn't know for sure that they were going to bid, and that's kind of tough for an agent too, because then you can't leverage like, oh, we know this person's in, so you should definitely get in too. So it was a really nerve-wracking day for me, and I was at my job trading sugar, and I heard from the people at like 9 and 10, my agent and the manager, and they were like, things, we haven't heard yet, but sometimes these things take time, so I was feeling bad. And then at 12 o'clock they called, and they said, and my manager, Julian, said, I have some really bad news for you, but I just want to say we put our best foot forward, and like I have no regrets about what we did. But after all the work you've done, I am sorry to say that you're not going to be published by the same company that publishes Ben Mesrick. And I was like, all right, but they're like, because it's going to be HarperCollins, and I was like, first of all, I was like, actually HarperCollins does publish Ben Mesrick sometimes, but I was like, I was in shock. I had sold my first piece of writing after trying for 7 years to do so. And not only that, it was just like, I love this story. So it was everything I ever wanted. And so I quit my job, I planned to quit my job, and I gave them my 2 weeks notice. And then my last day of work was also my 30th birthday. So I never worked an official day in my 30s beyond my 30th birthday. And that same night I proposed to my now fiance.
Wow.
And then I set out to write the book, and I spent all of last year writing it and continuing to research it. And then in June of last year, we began filming the documentary as well. Our first day of shooting was at E3, and the next day we went down to Bill White's house. And in LA, a lot of people drive, and there's the parking situation is not always easy. So we had a huge van with all the equipment for the shoot. And I was sleeping on the couch of my friend Adam, and I was the only person who was with a friend that had any room to park. So we parked it in like this really tiny space, and then I woke up at 4:30 to go drive down to Bill White's house, and I crashed the van while trying to maneuver out of this, like, I was doing like a 63-point turn, and I was just like, oh my God, like, I just couldn't believe it. That was how we started the trip, but, and I was really bummed, but sort of just speaking about how interesting the subject matter is, like, I mean, to get in a car accident on your first day of filming is a really bad thing, but as soon as I started speaking with Bill, like, my mind just locked into that. I always would just get in the zone. There was always so much fascinating stuff about this. I worked on it for over 3 years. There very sincerely never was a day where I woke up and I was like, oh, I got to do this again. And I've never experienced that with anything. Anything you love, you always feel that. Whether it's a person, whether it's a TV show, there's always going to be times when you're feeling like, all right, this isn't, I kind of would rather do something else, but I always loved doing this. And I was always surprised by the stories I would find. And even after I turned in the final draft of the book, part of it, I expected, when I would hear like, oh, I never told you this story, and I would first be like really bummed, like, oh my God, I wish I could have put that in. But now I just embrace it because it is a long book, but it's certainly not the comprehensive story. It tells a lot of the details and the important ones, but the best part is that it's going to bring to life a lot of things that are going to come to the surface, and I hope until the day I die, people keep sending me documents from this time period and keep telling me stories because I personally care. It's so interesting, and so that's sort of how I got close to where we are today.
That's awesome. Yeah, Al was, leading into our interview, with Al Nielsen about a week or so ago. We were talking about the book, and he's like, you know what? There's stuff in this book that we've never really talked about publicly, or like we haven't, even between like him and some of the people that are in the book haven't had, or talked about what was discussed in the book before. So it's really awesome to have this kind of information come to light. And going back to what you said a little earlier is it really kind of hit home with me, and it's something that I talked about with both Al and Tom, is that as a kid playing the games, I was never so much interested in who was behind making those games, like who were the creators. I didn't care about that. I was caring about playing Mortal Kombat or Mutant League Football or whatever. But now that I'm an adult, I take a lot more interest in those things, like going back, like who were these people, what was their story, like how did these games come about and ultimately happen, and so it's really awesome to go back and really look and find some of that information. It's crazy that people, I'm definitely not considering myself an expert at Sega, even though I run a Sega website. So many people. I
don't consider myself an expert either. I literally wrote the book on this, but there's still so much I don't know and never will know, or I'm going to hear one version or the other. But I don't even consider myself an expert. There's so much.
It's crazy. I just, it's great, but I'm really interested in seeing that hopefully more of this information will start, coming up, and, these people will start talking and sharing some of these stories more. And, even though that, it would be almost impossible to include all of these great stories in one book. I mean, it would have grown to be, I would imagine, just simply huge.
But hard. There were so many cool anecdotes that I sort of had to think of that criteria of, like, my grandma's reading this, what's going to get her to turn the page? Like, all right, I can make her laugh with this story, but then, like, maybe this is just going to turn into a string of anecdotes, and I want to always have that driving force underneath it. But at the same time, my greatest hope for this project is that it inspires other people to do the same kind of writing about this topic or about similar types of peripherally related topics, and I hope that they get the story, and I hope that the people who felt like their story wasn't included in this book, and even if they feel like they spoke to me and Blake, how could you not include this? I hope that they write a blog post and include it so that it is out there. That is the goal, and I think that is going to happen to a large extent. People. I think the other part of the reason people don't really write about video games in this capacity is, I mean, kind of in the way that comic books for once upon a time had been considered. It's sort of like a lowbrow entertainment source, and I think that's why serious journalists hadn't really touched the topic, and why people, even like Tom and Al, maybe don't brag about it as much as they could, or really think about it as much in the positive way that they should for the enormous value that it had on people.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I really enjoyed about the book, though, too, is it's not just talking about the games, and it's not just talking about how these games happen, but you go back and really we learn about the people, in it, and we learn more about Tom, we learn more about Al. But one of the parts that I really enjoyed in the book was something that really kind of made me sad at the same time, was when Tom was working on that I guess the campaign drive for the children with HIV. Going back to that, and it's how no other company really wanted to kind of go back and fund that campaign, and he got behind it because he had family friends who had a daughter with that, and just going back and hearing that and reading that story of how he brought her there, and was going around and having to meet some of these R&B artists or celebrities and stuff, and just reading all of that and learning and kind of like really getting emotionally attached to these people and that little girl. And then, learning that, she, ended up, passing away, weeks or months later. It really tugged at my heart. It was really emotional. But I like the fact that you included some of these stories that, that really kind of bring you to that place. But, at the same time, you also go back and tell these, uplifting, motivational type stories involved in there too. There's a lot in there, and I really like that.
Well, I really appreciate hearing. I mean, that's very kind of you say, but specifically with that example, because with Anik and having pediatric AIDS, that was one of the things I was worried about, that people would think I'm just trying to, include a tearjerker or try to appeal to a different audience, and something that I grappled with, and my publisher too said, we should really think about this. We don't want people to feel like you're exploiting this topic just to try to appeal to a different audience. And for a while, I actually removed it from the book. But then after speaking with Tom again, and seeing him get choked up and seeing how much it meant to him, I felt like if it meant that much to Tom, it must have meant that much to him back then, and it is pivotal to the story. So I just need to find the way to work it and make it not feel that way. And the other part, the other reason I really wanted to include that story and others like it is because as much as this is like console wars, I think the subtitle of Sega, Nintendo, and the Battle That Defined a Generation is actually accurate. Like I think, I remember a time when AIDS was a taboo word, and it was just like an alien life form, and you just weren't even supposed to talk about it. Like, and Sega was instrumental in helping to change that, and that's really important. And that's why I also talked about Ryan White and his experiences, because I wanted to give you the context so that you remember this time and not do it in a way that is trying to get you to cry or to ask for sympathy, but in a very matter-of-fact way that this was what the world was like back then, and here are the people who helped change that just a little bit.
And I think it also went back and really helped build the kind of person Tom was as well. Like you learn more about Tom, that he wasn't just this hard-driving president of a company, but he really had this soft heart, and he cared, and it wasn't just about numbers with him. It was about the people, and that I think that really helped build that side of it as well. So I absolutely don't agree that it was just in there.
Tom was a wonderful guy. Everyone I spoke with had stories like that. In the book, Diane. Sorry for the spoiler alert, but like towards the end of the book, she speaks to Tom, and she's had some problems with pregnancies, and just as much as she needs a boss, she needs a friend, and could provide that for her, even while not violating corporate policies that he wasn't allowed to reveal certain information, but he always knew how to connect with people and knows how to connect with people on a friendship level, and you feel like when you're speaking to him, he has your best interest at heart, and I genuinely think he does, and that's why he is so good at really shepherding imagination in children and telling stories.
That's amazing. Yeah, it was that was crazy. So you talked a little bit about the documentary. Now, the documentary is going to be coming out before the movie. Is that right?
Yeah. So the documentary, we filmed 15 or 16 interviews last year, 2013, and this was me and my co-director Jonah Tulis, with Seth, Evan, and Scott producing. And we filmed interviews with everyone on our list. The only person I would have also liked to include is Minoru Arakawa from Nintendo of America, but he's also the only person throughout this whole project that wouldn't speak with me. But we got Howard Lincoln, Howard Phillips, Gail Tilden, Peter Main, everyone I could possibly imagine except for him. And so we filmed all those interviews. There's definitely a chance we need to film more based on how the film looks, or if we want to expand the scope, but we're in post-production right now. It's coming together great. I think it's a valid question to ask, why do a documentary when you're also already wrote a book and you and isn't that overkill, or is this the same story over and over? And well, one, I think that the story is great enough that it sustains itself over and over, but it really is a different angle to the story. I think that nostalgia that people feel for that era, I specifically tried not to rely on that at all in the book, because I think that nostalgia is a personal experience, and I also think as a writer it's kind of cheap a little bit to try to rely on people's good feelings to associate with my writing and storytelling. But in the documentary, I definitely want to go back to that and use commercials and use videos from that time period that really bring you back to the 90s and remind you what it was like to actually be there. And my idea for Why Do documentary started with it was Jonah Tulis's idea. But he mentioned this to me, and I thought, man, I could probably just watch 90 minutes of Sega Nintendo commercials and be entertained. So, like, if that is, like, the worst this turns out to be,
Right.
and actually having these people tell the story in their own words, like, that's going to be something special. And it has been. And in a way, I also sort of see it as like a time capsule. All these people, knock on wood, are alive and well and able to tell their story, and now is a great time to do that.
Absolutely. Is there any reason why Arakawa wouldn't be a part of it? Or?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons. Nintendo in general was really hard for me the entire process to speak with these people and to get them to open up, and I definitely didn't. In the end, I did get a lot of what I wanted from them, but it took me a long time. And you'll see. I mean, you see in the book that the Sega perspective is shown much more prominently, and part of that is a narrative reason, and part of that is I just simply didn't have the information.
Yeah.
And even when, especially early on when I was speaking to these people, if I ask Al a question like, what was your favorite day? He'll speak for a half an hour, or a half an hour, and I'll throw a few prompts in there. I mean, I would joke, like, I'd speak with a Nintendo person and say, what was your favorite day? And they'd be like, September 6th. Next question.
Right.
Like, it was like pulling teeth at times, and luckily the project lasted long enough that I was able to get past the pulling teeth and really get some great stories. But so Arakawa, comes from that background of Nintendo being a very secretive, or at least controlling with their information type of company. And then the primary reason I'd imagine is because his father-in-law, Hiroshi Yamauchi, was the president of NCL, the parent company, at the time when I first began, and then Yamauchi passed away.
Right.
And there's still family drama and finances involved in all this. But at the same time, I've been thinking about this a lot. Why didn't he speak with me? I spoke with his handler, or someone who works nowadays. Arakawa is in Hawaii, and he runs Tetris Online, which he has all the worldwide rights, worldwide internet rights to Tetris. Which for anyone who's read Game Over, and there's a great chapter in there about Nintendo getting the Tetris rights. It's kind of funny that he's kind of back to the beginning with Tetris. So he's in Hawaii, and I know that I got him some chapters early on in the process that he read. I never heard feedback from them. But because the book is much more Sega-centric, and especially, I think, the first half of the book is extremely Sega-centric. The way that I got this to work with the limited information I have was I wanted to tell the story mostly from the viewpoint of Sega, of David and Goliath, and then as you despise Goliath, you start to realize maybe they're not so bad after all, or at least there's motivations and philosophical reasons behind what they do. But Nintendo's not focused very much, and some of the Nintendo people that I had built relationships with were offended by this and thought that it was really unfair. And I always kind of had to hold back saying, nobody spoke with me for 2.5 years, and
Right.
Tom, in addition to all the great things about him as a character, he made a lot of the decisions. So if we were talking now and said, all right, we should go buy billboards in Arkansas, Tom could actually do that.
Right.
But when I speak to people at Nintendo, they'd be like, we should buy billboards in Arkansas. They're like, great idea, let's bring it to Arakawa. And without interviewing Arakawa to hear, did he think that was a good idea? Why did he say yes? Why did he say no? You really miss a lot of the story, and I felt like this guy that was always described to me as such a father of the Nintendo family, and all he cared about was his employees. A part of me felt like I felt like he really let them down by not speaking with me and having that voice in this book. And I do understand that he has reasons bigger than my book, but I'm very disappointed that I was never able to speak with him and include that story, and have to, it's that he's mentioned in there, but I feel like you never really get a sense of this guy. And a lot of that is also, the way I brought the story to life was with dialogue and putting you in the room. And I felt like that could be a presumptuous thing to do in general, to write dialogue for someone that is based on their memory of the conversation, or me writing some made-up fictional small talk that's along the lines of what they remember to get to the meat of the conversation. And I always wanted to give the people that I was writing about the opportunity to review it, to make sure that Al could say, oh, I would never use that word. All right.
Sure.
I fix it. And so I never did that for anybody at Nintendo prior to speaking with them, and I never did that for Mr. Arakawa. I think there's very little dialogue for him except for like yeses and nos that I know that the person told me he said, and I really lose a lot of what makes him, I imagine, a very special and good leader, and that's really a shame to me.
I think one of the most interesting parts, relating to him was the pool party, that they had, at Nintendo, and just that was, the first sense of, showing that, personality of him outside of just this person who's running Nintendo and stuff, and how he actually did, seemingly, really. Appreciate and was a people-oriented person, but it is unfortunate that he wasn't more willing to do that and kind of share that Nintendo perspective. But going back and what you just said about how you kind of crafted some of these conversations that these people had. One of the things that Al told me was that it was amazing when he read it how well you were able to do that, because he said reading it seemed like he was hearing those people talk. You know what I mean? So like he said you really captured everyone's voice really well, and even in the small talk it was captured and done really well.
That's like the best compliment, because that's really what I was bringing to the table here, and trying to stay out of the way for the story for most of the time, except for just framing it with little bits of dialogue or what visuals I can add. And I do think that I've gotten better at writing over the years, but one thing I've always been good at is kind of like capturing a voice. And you should see like some of the notes I had was just like when I wanted to edit the book, it was like I need to use this phrase more than I notice this person says, or the same text of their sentences. And yeah, hearing from these Sega people that like you totally got that person right, or I feel like I'm in the room, is like, well, you guys were in that room, so that's perfect. And it means a lot, because in terms of like in terms of the old writing show versus tell, instead of saying Sega was a really fun work environment, I chose to write sometimes 4 sentences of dialogue that showed how it was fun. That was, I had to, I had very limited information to work with, so it was a dangerous science. But luckily, I did a pretty good job with it, and I had the resources of. I sent Al actually every chapter as I finished it along the way. So right. I would always get constant feedback, and that was awesome, because he is a really tough grader, and so you have to work to a higher standard. Mm-hmm. And so when I got like a good job from him, I knew I did a good job. But mostly it was helpful because he's kind of a verbose guy, and he has got great ideas. So if I would send him a chapter, I would always get back, oh, here's 10 stories you didn't include, and that some of them I would add, some of them I would say like, it's a cool story, but thanks anyway. But right. It really helped enrich that. Or he would say, oh, you should talk to Tim. And I talked to Tim. And so that was really, I always thanked him for, I felt like, keeping my sanity. Because, as a writer, before you share something with somebody, like it's all, and it's like this world that you're creating that you're the only person who knows about it. And so it actually just helped me to know that there was another person out there who was kind of on the same page with me. And so I'm like, I'll always be grateful to Al for that.
That's amazing. Going back and talking about the movie for a little bit, what do you envision for that? I mean, what do you kind of want to accomplish with this with the movie?
So with the feature film adaptation of the book, I was definitely inspired by The Social Network and Ben Mesrick's book, The Accidental Billionaires, and Moneyball as well, which I was surprised that they were turning into a movie, because the book itself is not as character-driven as the movie was, and it was more about sabermetrics, but they did a great job with the script and making it like a story about a person and a team. And so those, that feel of those movies, I think, is something that I would like to see from Console Wars. But at the same time, a big part of the reason that I wanted to work with Seth, Evan, and Scott is because they know this stuff a lot better than I do. So I think I know how to write a book, and I did a great job with what I wanted to do. But like, I'm excited to see what ideas they're gonna bring to the table, and whether it changes from what I have in the book or whether it's the same. Ultimately, it's their decision. So I can, they might ask for my advice, or I might offer my advice, but they're the ones who get paid the big bucks, and there's a reason they get paid the big bucks. I think people think of Seth and Evan as these stoner comic guys, and they do that great, and I laugh when they do. But to me, the film that they did that really made me feel like this was in trusted hands was that movie 50-50, about with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, with Seth and Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and he gets cancer, and he has a 50-50 chance of survival, and that's a pretty sensitive topic with like this fine line of comedy and drama that I haven't seen in any movie over the past few years, and I can only imagine from like a producer perspective how hard that must have been, because they also know they're very good at comedy, so they could have went for more of like a Seth MacFarlane Family Guy type of like, it's like, let's try to make the joke out of it. But like, that was a really emotionally moving piece, and that was one of the first they produced that those guys didn't write or direct, and I thought, that proved to me that they are, that was exactly what I wanted to see and what I wanted to hear, and that they were like the right guys to be working on Console Wars.
Awesome. I said it before we began, but the book, reading through it, really just not just inspired me as far as some of the stories within it, but your writing really has as well. Thank you. The quality of writing in it is really, really good. The way you've been able to craft it and tell this story. So I'm really looking forward to more people reading this out there. It's funny that some of my friends, because they know me, they know I enjoy video games and stuff. They've been posting this on my Facebook, like, "Hey, have you seen this new book coming out, Console Wars?" I was like, "Yeah, I've been reading the book. I'm going to be interviewing the author, tomorrow. So yeah, I'm kind of aware of it and everything." But it's just really funny. But it's great that more people are learning about this, and it's really spreading. And I really hope that it's going to be a massive success, and it looks like the ball's rolling and picking up more and more momentum as it gets going.
And the last thing I would want to say is just, I hope that this is the most successful book ever. But however successful it turns out to be, it's going to be that much more successful because of the subject matter. Because the example with Seth, and sort of thinking of Sega bringing on Michael Jackson and Joe Montana and these celebrities. To sort of, represent Sega in some way, or even when they would work with like Nickelodeon and having the teen stars, and that was like, borrowing their coolness. Al used to say that they would borrow coolness from Nickelodeon. I've learned so much. Like, I feel like this was my my MBA, not my mixed martial arts degree. I learned so many lessons. So, a lot of people I think there's been a lot of good buzz, other than just Seth's involvement and Scott's involvement and Evan's involvement. There's been excerpts that have been up on Kotaku and Grantland and Medium over the past week that I've seen a lot of people talking about, and that all happened because I reached out to a writer at Kotaku, and then that was something I never would have done if I didn't think about Sega. Just like, let's get this done. Let's go straight to the source. And then he was interested in the book, and sort of. I always feel like Al Milson is so great at making everything have a personal touch and making it feel special. So I thought, he said, mail me a book, and I said, how about, can I come there and give it to you personally so that you'll actually know who I am? And so I met this great writer, Yannick Lejac, over at Kotaku, and he liked what he read and was going to help me get this excerpt up. And a lot of steps along the way with just getting the word out for this book have been lessons that I've learned from Sega and Nintendo, as well as the public. HarperCollins, I'm sure, has really benefited from this, and they've done a great job. So taking it all back is that this book is certainly a book about video games, and I hope that it inspires other books about video games, but it is for gamers and non-gamers alike, and there's a lot of lessons, personal lessons and business lessons that can be learned for people of any industry, of any age.
I absolutely agree, and I thank you so much for coming in and talking with me today. We definitely have to get you back on, and like we said, maybe we can get Tom and Al and yourself on, and we can have an awesome talk and everything. But once again, and we'll definitely keep pushing the book to everyone and spreading that as much as we can. But once again, thanks, Blake, and I wish you all the success.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No problem.